refer to it. Okay, so listen socket is going to be my new socket that's listening. Now I need to bind that to that address that I have set up here, server info or server address. So I'm going to bind on the listen socket. So I'm going to bind this socket that I've just created, and I'm going to bind it to this address, which has been filled in for me. And I need to bind the length of the address. So how long is this? But that is also filled out for me. There we go. Okay. Again, I'm not doing my error checking in here. I will need to. I want to check to see whether these fail. So for instance, if I were to look at bind, it always helps to put the parentheses in. That's better. I need systype, so I've got that. I've got syssock.h. It takes the socket file descriptor, which is an int, so that's our listen socket. It takes the sock address, which is that AI address, and it takes the length, which is the address length. So that's all good. The return value. If it succeeds, we return 0. Otherwise, we return a -1. So if we get 0 back, then we know it succeeded. If we don't get 0 back, we know it failed. So if we were going to do testing, which we would want to, I could even test if it's not equal to 0, or I could test to see if it's equal to -1. I often like to see if it's not equal to 0. So if it's not equal to 0, then something failed. So I might put out a message here, p error, bind failed. And what p-error will do is print out the bind failed, and then we'll also print out the error that occurred. So for instance, if perhaps the port number was already in use, and so we couldn't bind to it or something like that, it will tell us what the error is. So all of our calls really should have these tests to see that that socket actually returned a valid socket, that bind succeeded, and so on. And you could do that by looking at your return values and testing. For quickness, I'm going to leave those out, but you should. Every time you make any function call with the get address info and so on, you should be adding in your testing. Right, so I've bound it now. So now I have to listen. So I listen on the listening socket for new connections, and queue length is defined in my config file. Actually, I don't have a config file for this, so I'm going to add queue length. It doesn't matter. Well, it does matter. It tells me how many I'm willing to allow to be queued waiting for service. So if, for instance, I already have accepted 5, then I won't accept any more until I have serviced some of those 5. Okay, so that some of them are returned. So once I have 5 connections, that would be it. So I've listened. Now I need to accept. When I accept, it's going to return a new socket. And I've called this my connection socket. It's just the variable. I've called it up here. It's useful to call it something that's going to make you remember that this is the one that's actually talking to the client. So I'm going to listen, accept on my listen socket. And let's have a quick look at the accept. Okay, it still needs types and socket, which we've got. It takes the descriptor. It takes an address and an address length. And if we read down here, the address is a pointer to an address structure. It's filled in with the address of the peer socket. So when it's null, nothing is filled in. And address length is not used. So if we actually put a structure there, it will actually fill it in with the address of the client that's connecting to us. That might be useful if I want to check where the client's coming from, what their address is, and perhaps for security. But for this one, I don't need it, so I'm just going to set those to null. Once again, we should be looking at the return value and checking it and testing as we did here. So if I want to know what the client's addresses are, I can put that in here. If I don't care, I can just set those to null. Now I need to read and write the characters. So I'm going to have a character and then capitalized character. I'm going to keep reading in as long as the client is sending stuff or is alive. So I'm going to read on the connection socket, not the listen socket. So I want the one that's connected to the client. I'm going to read in, stick it into my character variable here. But you have to spell it correctly. And tell it how big. And again, how would I know that? I would look at my receive. I've got those two. So receive takes a file descriptor, a pointer to something that you want to write the result into, the size of that, and then optional flags. There's various flags you can put in to stop it from waiting and so on, but we don't need those. And down here again, the return value returns the number of bytes that it actually received. So if it received 1 byte, it'll return 1. Received no bytes, it'll return 0. And it will turn to -1 if the error occurs. I'm basically got in a loop that once it receives nothing, then, or as long as it's receiving values, so it's not receiving 0 bytes, then it will continue to loop. Once there's an error, because maybe the client shut down the socket, or I didn't read any bytes from the client, then this will exit this loop. Okay, so I need to read the character, which is, I've got it here. I need to capitalize it. To upper is not built in C, so again, I need to find that. But generally what you're going to find with programming is if there is something that you can think of that you probably would use, chances are there is a library that has it. So here I need, to get to upper, I need ctype.h. I can see that by looking at, okay, there's a library, it's written in the library ctype.h. This standard I/O I actually don't need. That's to basically print things out and to read things in. But I don't need that for to upper. I just need ctype.h. While I'm checking that, I'll check p-error as well. What do I need to use p-error? P-error is in standard I/O. So I will need standard I/O to use p-error. Okay, looking good so far. So now I have the capitalized character. All I have to do is send it back to the client. takes the socket descriptor, where the buffer or the variable where it's stored, the address of it, and the length, and again flags. So very much like the receive. So I'm going to send it on the connection socket. I want to send the character, or capital character. I want to send back the character. And the length of that is the size of a char, of the character. And I'm not setting any flags. Done. Now I just close off my socket. Close off my listening socket because I'm done. I'm not going to accept any more connections. If I want to accept more connections, then I basically leave that out. Okay? But unless I loop up here and accept again, it's just going to exit. So I'm going to go ahead and close it because I'm done once that happens. Close that off. And let's see if we can compile it. I'll probably have some errors. There's always a few. Call it server. And we've got a fair few. Yeah, I mistyped. You can see sever rather than server. It's always a few like that. Looks like I did it a few times. And it looks like I missed out on the function close. Server. Yeah, I did it in the declaration. There we go. Server address. Let me look at close. I need UNI standard to close. Let's try that again. I've got a few more. Oh, okay. Didn't declare default port. That's fine. I'll fix that. Memset. I've missed an include for memset. Yeah, it says, okay, I need string.h for memset. And I need to define what my default port are.